I used to think the word government before the word contract was very special. Turns out, it's a typical Tuesday at the office for most people. What the average Joe doesn't realize is that there's a subset of contracts for highly specialized individuals, people who lie outside the norm. And that's what I'll be telling you about today. More specifically, I'm going to tell you about the final 10 contracts I accepted before I learned what the government actually hired me for. The first one looked like Pest Control. That was how it appeared on the solicitation, anyway. Biological Nuisance Abatement. Single specimen. Termination authorized. The location was an abandoned meat processing plant outside Hensley, Iowa. The contract paid $82,000 if I finished before sunrise and left the building standing. That last condition was probably included because of who I am. A grain elevator in Nebraska had taught the people writing these things to be specific. I accepted the job at 2:13 on a Tuesday morning. 6 minutes later, my handler called. "No explosives," Shaw said. "We need enough left to confirm disposal." "All right, what am I looking for?" He paused. Shaw had been my handler for 7 years. I knew when he was deciding how much he was allowed to tell me. Quadrupled. Approximately 200 pounds. No confirmed visual description. That's not much. That's why we're paying you $82,000. Then he hung up. The plant had been closed for 11 years, but somebody had cleared the service road that morning. Fresh scrape marks showed beneath my headlights when I arrived at 3:05. A faded cartoon pig smiled above the loading docks. One painted eye had peeled away. The other watched me unload. When a contract doesn't tell you what you're hunting, you prepare with everything that you can carry. I brought a rifle, a 12 gauge, ultraviolet lamps, salt, motion alarms, and a cattle prod modified to stop a human heart. If that sounds excessive, you've never been trapped with something that could imitate your mother crying. The padlock on the personnel entrance had already been cut. That bothered me more than the blood. A dark smear crossed the doorframe, and 3 drops led inside beside fresh work boot prints. Shaw claimed the property had been cleared 6 hours earlier. The floor disagreed. I sent him a photograph. He didn't respond. The plant smelled of old grease and industrial disinfectant. Steel rails crossed the ceiling, carrying hundreds of empty hooks through the dark. Every few seconds, one moved just enough to squeal against the track. There was no wind, and county records said the power had been disconnected for years. I followed the prints until I heard someone hammering inside a supervisor's office. Leon Pike, a county employee sent to inspect a broken water main, had barricaded himself behind the desk. I walked in and he kept staring over my shoulder. "It moves up there," he whispered, pointing toward the rails. "I never saw the whole thing, Just the hands. How many? More than it ought to have. That was the first useful description I'd received. I marked the route outside with chemical lights and told Pike to wait for 3 evenly spaced shotgun blasts. He asked whether I was with the government. I told him I was self-employed. I think that frightened him even more. The old kill floor gave me more room to work. Somebody had restored power to the rail motor, so I tested its pull chain, covered the entrances with motion alarms, and suspended my cattle prod from the track. Then I placed my phone in the center of the room, playing the sound of boots running across metal stairs. Most predators can ignore bait. Very few can ignore something fleeing. The first sound came from directly above me. Just a quick metallic click as one of the hooks rotated on its chain. I looked up and saw a hand wrapped around the rail. It had 6 fingers, long enough to close around the track. A second hand appeared, and a third and a fourth. The thing unfolded from between the hooks, hairless and gray, with its rear legs bent backward and 4 narrow arms along its ribs. It had no eyes. A seam ran from its forehead to the bottom of its throat. The seam began to open, and I fired before it dropped. The rifle round spun it sideways, but one hand remained clamped around the rail. It swung beneath the hooks, knocked me across the cutting table, and landed on all 6 limbs. I grabbed the shotgun. A slug tore through its shoulder. A magnesium shell struck its mouth and filled the room with white fire. It screamed without making a sound. I felt the scream behind my eyes instead of hearing it. The pressure drove me to one knee as blood ran from my nose. Behind me, Pike began screaming too, and the creature turned toward the office. I hit it with the cattle prod before it could move. The current locked every limb straight, its jaw split open, exposing rows of black teeth. It should have dropped. Instead, one of its hands closed around my vest and lifted me from the floor. For a few seconds, we were close enough that I could smell antiseptic on its skin. The creature pulled me toward its open face. I jammed my forearm against its throat, but another hand caught my wrist. Something moved inside that vertical mouth, brushing over my cheek like a wet finger. Then, the entire thing went still. It tilted its head as if it were listening to something very far away. "There you are," it whispered. I grabbed the hanging chain beside us and pulled. The overhead rail groaned to life. Hooks dragged the creature backward as the cattle prod caught between 2 brackets. Its grip tore away. I fell, rolled beneath the table, and came up with the shotgun. The creature ripped itself free, leaving one arm behind. But that bought me enough time to put a slug through the open seam in its face. The first shot knocked it down. The second stopped it moving, and the third was for Pike. Pike came out shaking so badly that I had to guide him through the chemical lights. I watched him lock himself inside his county truck. Then I returned to photograph the body and collect the required tissue sample. That was when I found the plate. It was beneath the skin on the creature's chest, exposed by my first shot. A black metal plate directly fixed to the breastbone with 4 tiny screws. I cleaned away the blood and read the stamped lettering. Property of the U.S. government. Palisade Extension 01. Return to Site 0. I had killed plenty of things for the government by then. Until that moment, I had never killed anything that belonged to it. I called Shaw. This time, he answered immediately. "The specimen is down," I said. "I found an identification plate." Silence. "Shaw? Leave the building. What is a palisade? Your contract is complete. Leave the building now." 3 black trucks entered the lot, and men in white protective suits climbed out, carrying transport cases. The closest response team was supposedly more than an hour away. These men arrived 6 minutes after the creature died. When I stepped outside, Leon Pike's county truck was still there. Leon wasn't. One man gave me a receipt for the body and refused to say where Pike had gone. By the time I reached the highway, my payment had arrived. An additional $12,000 was listed as witness management and discretion. I should have called Shaw back. I should have driven home, copied every file I had, and disappeared before sunrise. Instead, I kept thinking about the antiseptic smell on that creature's skin and the way it had spoken when it touched me. There you are. At 5:41 that morning, another solicitation appeared on my phone. Disaster recovery, multiple missing persons, St. Marie's Parish, Louisiana. The payment was higher this time. So was the threat classification. The final line of the contract read, "Under no circumstances should the contractor respond to voices heard on the emergency band."